The Theron cluster burned. 20 star systems, home to billions of beings under attack by the largest swarm concentration anyone had ever seen. The void black creatures poured through space like an infection, consuming everything in their path. Taiwan stood on the flagship's bridge and watched the tactical displays. Red markers showed swarm forces. Blue markers showed the Allied fleet. There was far too much red. All ships reporting ready, Commander Relthor said. His voice was steady despite the odds. Mixed species units are in position. This is your plan, Taiwan. Make it work. No pressure, Taiwan thought. The old plan would have been simple. Send the fleet's strongest warriors to fight the swarm's strongest forces. Champion against champion, hero against monster. It was how every battle had been fought for 10,000 years. Taiwan's plan was different. He'd divided the fleet into mixed species combat groups. Each group had soldiers from multiple races trained to support each other. The Korgath held the front lines with their strength. The Drakthar provided air support with their wings. The Valanthians coordinated units with telepathy. The Kelthians used their speed for hit-and-run attacks. And humans were everywhere, acting as sergeants and coordinators and engineers who kept everything running. First contact in 30 seconds, someone called out. Taiwan pulled up a communication channel that connected to every combat group. Remember your training, he said. Don't try to be heroes. Watch each other's backs. Use your advantages. We're not trying to win glory. We're trying to survive and save lives. The swarm hit them like a tsunami. The first hour was chaos. The swarm was stronger than intelligence reports suggested. They swarmed through defensive lines, dissolving ships and soldiers. But Taiwan's forces adapted. When one group got overwhelmed, nearby units moved to support them. When the swarm concentrated on the Korgath defenders, Drakthar flyers attacked from above. When swarm creatures adapted to energy weapons, human engineers switched tactics and used physical explosives. Southern front is collapsing, Jiwoo reported. She was coordinating units from a command ship. Swarm broke through the Prin defensive line. Send Kethra's squadron, Taiwan ordered. And tell the Uratha units to fall back through the asteroid field. Set charges as they go. Kethra led her mixed squadron into the breach. She'd been training with Taiwan's program for a month now, and she'd become one of its strongest supporters. Her Drakthar warriors flew alongside Kelthian pilots and human marines all working together. The charges exploded. Asteroids crashed into the swarm forces, slowing them enough for the defensive line to reform. Southern front stabilized, Jiwoo reported, but 3 more fronts were in trouble. The swarm was everywhere, adapting faster than anyone expected. Taiwan made decisions as fast as he could, moving units like pieces on a board. But it wasn't enough. They were holding but barely, and people were dying. We need to strike at their command structure, Commander Relthor said. The swarm has a central node coordinating everything. It's on Kios 4, in the Theron cluster's heart. If we destroy it, the swarm forces will lose coordination. That's deep in enemy territory, Hejin said. She'd come to the bridge to coordinate engineering support. Anyone who goes there will be surrounded. Previous champions would have gone alone, Velshara said. She joined the fleet for this battle. They would have tried to be the hero who saved everything. Most would have died before reaching the target. Taiwan looked at the tactical display. Velshara was right. The path to Kios 4 was suicide for a single person, no matter how powerful. Then I won't go alone, he said. Jiwoo, I need volunteers for a strike team. Mixed species. Our best people. You'll have them, Jiwoo replied. 2 hours later, Taiwan stood in a hangar bay with his strike team. Kethra was there naturally. So was Bong Su, despite having only one arm now from previous battles. Jiwoo had insisted on coming, saying someone needed to keep Taiwan from doing anything stupid. Sun He was there as their medic, and surprisingly, War Chief Grandar of the Korgath Empire had volunteered. I would see if this human way of fighting truly works, the massive alien said. If I die, at least I'll die learning something new. They took a fast assault ship through the battle lines. The swarm swarmed around them, but the fleet created a corridor, sacrificing ships to give them a path through. We're through the worst of it, their pilot called back. Landing on Kios 4 in 10 minutes. Kios 4's surface looked like a nightmare. The swarm had consumed the entire planet. Nothing lived here anymore. Just void black creatures flowing across dead ground. They landed near the swarm node. It was a massive structure of twisted non-matter, impossible to look at directly. Swarm creatures guarded it by the thousands. That's a lot of enemies, Bongsu said calmly. We don't have to fight all of them, Taewon said. Just get to the node. Jiwoo, what's our approach? Fast and dirty. Use the terrain, set traps, keep moving. Jiwoo pointed to a ravine. We go through there, plant charges along the way. When we reach the node, Taewon uses the sword to finish it while we cover him. That's barely a plan, Gronder said. Welcome to human tactics, Bongsu replied with a grin. They moved fast. Kethra scouted from above, calling out swarm positions. Grandar and Bongsu held the front, their different fighting styles complementing each other perfectly. Sunhee used her telepathy to keep everyone coordinated. Jiwoo directed them through the safest paths, which weren't safe at all. And Taewon fought with the sword blazing, not trying to be a legendary hero, just trying to keep his team alive. They set charges. They used the ravine walls to funnel swarm creatures into kill zones. They helped each other when someone got overwhelmed. Grandar saved Kethra when she was surrounded. Bongsu covered Sunhee while she treated Jiwoo's injuries. Taewon used the sword to cut through obstacles and clear paths. They fought together, not as individuals seeking glory, but as a unit that trusted each other. When they reached the node, thousands of swarm creatures swarmed toward them. This is where we make our stand, Grandar said. He sounded almost happy. No, Taewon said. This is where we win, he raised the sword. The blade blazed brighter than ever before, and something incredible happened. The sword's power flowed out from Taewon, touching everyone on his team. For a moment, they all felt what he felt. The sword's strength, its knowledge, its purpose. They fought like they'd been fighting together for years instead of weeks. Perfect coordination, each person covering the other's weaknesses. The swarm kept coming, but they held. Taewon reached the node's core and drove the sword deep into its heart. The blade's golden energy exploded outward. The node screamed, a sound that hurt to hear, and collapsed in on itself. Above them, across the entire Theron cluster, something changed. The swarm forces lost coordination. They started retreating, no longer acting as one unified force. It's working, Jiwoo said, monitoring her communicator. The swarm is pulling back. We're winning. The team fought their way back to the ship. Grandar took a hit protecting Bongsu and fell. They carried him together, refusing to leave anyone behind. When swarm creatures surrounded them, the fleet arrived, bombing runs clearing a path. They made it to the ship. Barely. Sunhee worked frantically to save Grandar while they flew back through battle lines that were now pushing forward instead of falling back. You did it, Commander Relthor said when they reached the flagship. The swarm is retreating from the cluster. We've won. Taewon collapsed in the hangar bay, too exhausted to stand. Kethra sat down next to him, her wings torn but her eyes bright. That was insane, she said. Did it work? Taewon asked. We're alive. The cluster is saved. Billions of people will live. She looked at the sword, which had stopped glowing so brightly. Yes, it worked. Your human way of fighting works. In the medical bay, they found Grandar would survive. The Korgath war chief looked at Taewon with new respect. I have fought for 200 years, Grandar said. I have won 1,000 battles. But I never fought like that. Never trusted others so completely. He paused. It was better. Harder, but better. Later, Taewon found his sister Yunji in the crew quarters. She'd served on a communication ship during the battle. She was alive, crying with relief. We did it, she said. Not just you, all of us. We actually did it. Taewon hugged her. Yeah, we did. That night, he stood in the observation deck and watched the Theron cluster. Ships moved between the systems, beginning rescue and recovery operations. Mixed species crews working together. The sword rested at his side, glowing softly. It showed him an image, not of the battle they'd won, but of the future. More battles to come. The swarm wasn't destroyed, just pushed back. But now the galaxy knew how to fight it. Together, the war isn't over, Heejin said, joining him at the window. No, Taewon agreed. But we're winning now. For the first time in decades, we're actually winning. News of the victory spread fast. The Galactic Council convened. Species that had mocked Taewon's training program now wanted to join it. The Korgath Empire officially requested human tactical advisors. The Valanthian Concordat began integrating mixed species units into their fleets. The galaxy was learning, not to wait for heroes, but to become heroes together. And in a workshop on the flagship, Heejin finally succeeded. She'd figured out how to replicate the sword's energy signature. The news called Taewon a hero. They showed footage of him fighting on Hesperus III, the sword blazing in his hands. They interviewed the civilians he'd saved. Dayun told reporters that the chosen champion had fought with courage and wisdom. Taewon watched the broadcast from his quarters and felt like a fraud. Yes, they'd saved the settlement, but the planet itself was lost. The swarm had consumed Hesperus III completely. Millions had evacuated, but millions more hadn't made it out in time. "You're thinking too much," Hyejin said. She sat across from him working on her tablet. "You saved who you could save. That's all anyone can do." "It's not enough," Taewon said. "It never is. But it's something." She looked up at him. "The council wants to see you tomorrow. High Archon Velshara specifically requested your presence." Taewon groaned. "More tests? Probably. Or maybe they want to give you a medal." Hyejin smiled. "Try to look less miserable if it's the second one." The next morning, Taewon stood in the temple archives on Kelthros Prime. The room was enormous, filled with shelves that reached toward a ceiling he couldn't see. Every shelf held books, data crystals, and artifacts from civilizations that had died before humans learned to make fire. High Archon Velshara waited for him beside a reading table. She looked even older than before, as if the stress of the last few weeks had aged her centuries. "Thank you for coming," she said. "Did I have a choice?" Taewon asked. "No, but politeness costs nothing." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. We need to talk about the sword and why it chose you." Taewon sat. The sword rested across his lap, glowing softly. Velshara activated a holographic display. Images appeared in the air above the table. They showed warriors from throughout history. All of them held the Valkyroth blade. "The sword has chosen champions for 10,000 years, Velshara said. Every champion was a mighty warrior, the strongest of their generation. They achieved great victories." She paused. "They all died." "I know," Taewon said. "The sword shows me their memories sometimes. Then you know they failed. Not through lack of skill or courage. They failed because they were too powerful." Velshara zoomed in on one image, a Korgath warrior standing alone on a battlefield, surrounded by swarm corpses. "This is Krenthor. He could split mountains with a single strike. He fought for 50 years and killed more swarm creatures than anyone before or since." "What happened to him?" Taewon asked. "He fought alone. He became so powerful that no one could stand beside him. Other warriors couldn't keep up. They became an audience watching their champion fight. And when Krenthor finally fell, he fell alone with no one to guard his back." The display changed to show other champions, a Valanthian priestess, a Drakthar prince, a Saurian general. All of them powerful, all of them isolated by their own strength. "The sword was forged to save civilizations," Velshara said. "But somewhere along the way it learned that individual power wasn't the answer. The swarm can't be defeated by a single hero, no matter how strong. It requires cooperation, unity, things that champions make difficult." Taewon stared at the holographic warriors. "So the sword chose me because I'm weak?" "No, it chose you because you're human." Velshara deactivated the display. "Your species has no ancient warrior tradition, no honor codes about single combat. You evolved as persistence hunters who worked in groups. You created tools to overcome your physical limitations. When you fought wars, you fought them with armies and tactics, not individual champions." "We're not special," Taewon said. "We just do what works." "Exactly. And that is what the galaxy needs to learn." Velshara sat down slowly, her old bones creaking. "The sword didn't choose you to be a hero. It chose you to teach others how to fight, not as individual warriors seeking glory, but as a unified force." Taewon thought about the battle on Hesperus III, about how his squad had worked together, about Daun's people fighting with improvised weapons and desperate courage. "The other species won't accept that," he said. "They have thousands of years of warrior traditions. They're not going to listen to a human mechanic." "Some won't," Velshara agreed, "but others will, especially the smaller species who don't have legendary warriors, the ones who've been dying while waiting for champions to save them." She handed him a datapad. It contained military reports, tactical analyses, and casualty figures. Taewon scrolled through them and felt sick. The swarm was winning. Not quickly, but steadily. Every month more worlds fell. Every year the defensive lines pulled back. "We're losing," he said. "Yes. Unless something changes." Velshara looked at the sword. "That weapon chose you to be the change. Not by becoming the greatest warrior, but by teaching everyone to fight together." Taewon left the archives with his head spinning. He spent the rest of the day walking through the fleet flagship thinking. He passed training halls where alien warriors practiced ancient combat forms. He saw soldiers from a dozen species who barely spoke to each other, separated by language and culture and old grudges. That evening, he asked for a meeting with Commander Relthor. "This better be important," the Saurian commander said. "I have 300 reports to review." "I want to start a training program," Taiwan said. "Teaching mixed species squads to fight using human tactics." Relthor's cold eyes studied him. "Explain." Taiwan explained his idea. "Take soldiers from different species and train them to work together. Not as individual warriors, but as units. Use human military doctrine as a foundation. Cover fire, mutual support, tactical flexibility. Share the sword's techniques with others so they could fight more effectively." "The Korgath will never accept this," Relthor said. "Neither will the Valanthians. They have warrior traditions that go back millennia." "Then we start with the species who don't," Taiwan replied. "The smaller nations. The ones who need help the most." Relthor was quiet for a long time. Finally, he nodded. "I'll authorize it. But you'll need an assistant. Someone who understands both human tactics and alien psychology." That's how Taiwan met Jiwoo. She was a human tactical officer with a sharp mind and sharper tongue. She'd been teaching at the Fleet Academy for 5 years, trying to get aliens to understand human military thinking with limited success. "So you're the chosen one," Jiwoo said when they met. "You don't look like much." "I'm not," Taiwan said. "Good. The ones who look impressive are usually idiots." She pulled up a holographic display showing various alien species. "If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. Different species fight differently. We can't just slap a human training manual on them and hope it works." They worked together for weeks developing training programs. Meanwhile, Hyojin and her engineering team worked on something else, trying to replicate the sword's energy signature. If they could create weapons that held even a fraction of the blade's power, ordinary soldiers might stand a chance against the swarm. "It's not going well," Hyojin admitted one night. "The sword's energy is too complex. We can't figure out how to bottle it." "Keep trying," Taiwan said. "We need every advantage we can get." The first training class had 30 volunteers. Most were from smaller species, the Kelthians, the Prin, the Urathi. None of them were legendary warriors. They were ordinary soldiers who'd watched their worlds burn while waiting for champions to save them. Taiwan stood before them on the first day and felt completely inadequate. "I'm not going to teach you to be heroes," he said. "I'm going to teach you to survive, to work together, to use whatever advantages you have, even if other species think those advantages are cheating." A Kelthian raised a tentacle. "The Korgath call us cowards because we don't fight with honor." "Honor doesn't matter if you're dead," Taiwan replied. "The swarm doesn't care about honor. It just consumes. We need to be smart enough and mean enough to stop it." They trained hard. Jiwoo taught them tactics. Bongsu taught them practical combat skills. And Taiwan shared what the sword had taught him. Techniques that enhanced reflexes, strategies for fighting creatures that couldn't be killed by normal means. Slowly, the volunteers became a team. They learned each other's strengths and weaknesses. The Kelthians were fragile but fast. The Prin were strong but slow. The Urathi could see in the dark. Together, they covered each other's weaknesses. News of the training program spread. Some species mocked it. The Korgath Empire's ambassador called it an insult to warrior traditions. But others paid attention, especially when the mixed species units started performing better in simulations than traditional warrior squads. 1 month into the program, Taiwan received a message that made his blood run cold. The swarm was attacking the Theron cluster, 20 systems including several human colonies, and his sister Yunji had enlisted in the Defense Fleet Volunteers. She was in the cluster. "We have to go," Taiwan told Commander Relthor. "The fleet is already mobilizing," Relthor replied. "This will be the largest battle since the war began. If we lose the Theron cluster, the swarm will have a clear path to dozens of core worlds, including Earth." Taiwan looked at the sword. It blazed brighter than ever before, as if it knew what was coming. This would be the real test. Not of whether one human could wield a legendary weapon, but of whether the galaxy could learn to fight together. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, toward the Theron cluster, toward war. The drop pod hit the ground hard enough to rattle Taiwan's teeth. Something exploded nearby, Smoke filled the pod's interior. Through the cracked view screen, he saw dark shapes moving through the smoke. "Move, move, move," someone shouted. The pod's door blew open. Soldiers rushed out into chaos. Tae-Wan followed them and immediately wished he hadn't. The world outside was nightmare made real. The sky was black despite it being midday. The darkness wasn't clouds or smoke. It was the swarm itself, a living shadow that covered everything. Where it touched the ground, plants withered and died. Buildings crumbled. Even the air felt wrong, like it was being sucked away. "Contact!" A Korgath soldier fired his weapon at something in the smoke. Tae-Wan saw his first swarm creature and almost threw up. It wasn't a creature at all. It was an absence, a hole in reality shaped like something alive. Black tendrils that dissolved anything they touched. No eyes, no mouth, just wrongness that hurt to look at. The Korgath's bullets passed through it without effect. "Energy weapons only," someone else shouted. The squad scattered. Tae-Wan found himself running through ruined streets with 4 other soldiers. He didn't even know where he was running to. He just knew he had to get away from those things. Left, go left. A Drakthar warrior with 4 arms pointed toward a collapsed building. They ducked inside just as more swarm creatures flowed past like oil down a drain. Tae-Wan's heart hammered in his chest. His hands shook so badly he could barely hold the sword. "Status report," the Drakthar said. Her name was Kethra, and she looked at Tae-Wan with disgust. "You're the chosen one?" "You're terrified," yes, Tae-Wan said honestly. There was no point lying. Useless, Kethra checked her weapons. The other soldiers did the same. There was a young Valanthian named Sunhee who carried medical supplies. 2 Korgath brothers named Thun and Grav who communicated mostly with grunts, and Kethra, who clearly wanted to be anywhere else but stuck with a scared human. "Our pod landed 5 miles from the target zone," Sunhee said quietly. She had a gentle voice. "The evacuation point is northeast. We need to move before the swarm surrounds us." "I'll scout ahead," Kethra said. She spread her wings and flew up through a hole in the ceiling. Thun and Grav positioned themselves at the doorways, watching for threats. Sunhee sat down and closed her eyes, probably using her telepathy to scan the area. That left Tae-Wan alone with his fear and the glowing sword. The weapon pulsed warmly. Tae-Wan realized it was trying to calm him down. "I'm sorry," he whispered to it. "I don't know what you saw in me, but I think you made a mistake." The sword showed him an image. Not a vision like in his dreams, but a simple picture in his mind. It showed a human settlement somewhere nearby. People who needed help. Kethra dropped back through the hole. "Path northeast is blocked. Swarm is everywhere. But I saw something else. Human colony 2 miles west. They're under attack." "That's the opposite direction of the evacuation point," Thun said. His voice was deep and slow. "I know where it is," Kethra snapped. "I'm saying we can't reach the evacuation point. The swarm is too thick." "Then we go to the colony," Tae-Wan said. Everyone looked at him. "That's stupid," Kethra said. "Our mission is to reach the evacuation point, not play hero for some random settlers." "Our mission is to protect civilians," Tae-Wan replied. The sword was warm in his hand. "Those are civilians who need protection. You're not in charge here, human." "No, but I have the sword that's supposed to save the galaxy, and it's telling me to go west." Tae-Wan stood up. His legs still shook, but he forced them to hold steady. "You can come with me or not." He walked toward the west exit. After a moment, he heard footsteps behind him. All 4 soldiers followed. Kethra muttered something in her own language that was probably an insult. They moved through the ruined city carefully. Twice they had to hide while swarm creatures passed. Once they had to run when a building collapsed. But the sword guided Tae-Wan, showing him safe paths in his mind. The human colony was a small farming settlement. It sat in a valley surrounded by fields that were now blackened and dead. Walls made of whatever materials the settlers could find surrounded the main buildings. Tae-Wan could see people on those walls fighting with rifles and improvised weapons. "They're going to die," Kethra said flatly. "Look at the swarm numbers. There must be 50 creatures down there." She was right. The settlement was surrounded. Even as they watched, part of the wall crumbled under a swarm assault. "We have to help them," Sunhee said. 5 of us against 50 swarm creatures? That's suicide." Kethra looked at Tae-Wan. "Even with your magic sword." Tae-Wan looked at the settlement. He thought about his home on Earth's factory moon. About his mother and sister. If the swarm reached Earth, they would be down there fighting with whatever they had, just like these colonists. The sword blazed brighter. It wasn't giving him courage. It was showing him what he already knew. We don't have to kill all 50, Taewon said. We just have to give them time to hold until help arrives. And we don't fight fair. He explained his plan. It was messy and desperate and relied on luck as much as skill. It was the kind of plan that no legendary warrior would ever use. Kethra stared at him. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Will it work? Taewon asked. She thought about it. Maybe. If we're lucky and the swarm is stupid. Good enough. They split up. Thun and Grav went left, Kethra went right. Sunhee stayed with Taewon. They worked their way around the settlement, staying hidden. Taewon used the sword to cut through a wall, creating an opening. Not a heroic charge. Just a hole to sneak through. Inside the settlement, they found an elderly woman organizing the defense. Her name was Dayun, and she had the toughest eyes Taewon had ever seen. Who are you? She demanded. Help, Taewon said simply. He showed her the sword. We have a plan, but we need your people to follow it exactly. Dayun studied him for maybe 3 seconds. Then she nodded. Tell me, Taewon explained. They would use the settlement itself as a weapon. Lure the swarm creatures into kill zones. Use explosives made from farming equipment. Set traps. Fight dirty. You fight like a human, Dayun said. There might have been approval in her voice. I am human, Taewon replied. I meant old-school human. Before we joined the galaxy and started trying to fight like the aliens do. She grinned. I like it. They put the plan into action. It was chaos. Nothing went exactly right. But Taewon learned something important. He didn't have to fight like a legendary hero. He just had to fight smart. When swarm creatures broke through the east wall, Thun and Grav collapsed a building on them. When more came from the north, Kethra led them into a field rigged with explosive fertilizer. Sunhee used her telepathy to coordinate everyone, keeping them working together. And Taewon was everywhere, not leading from some command center, but running through the settlement with the sword blazing. He killed swarm creatures when he had to. He rescued trapped civilians. He plugged holes in the defense. He even helped an old man carry ammunition to the walls. At one point, he found himself face to face with 3 swarm creatures in a narrow alley. There was nowhere to run. The creatures advanced, their tendrils reaching out to dissolve him. Taewon didn't try to be brave. He didn't make a heroic stand. He looked up, saw a water tower, and used the sword to cut the supports. Thousands of gallons of water crashed down on the swarm creatures. They writhed and scattered. It didn't kill them, but it slowed them down enough for Taewon to run past. That was brilliant, Sunhee said when he told her later. Completely unheroic but brilliant. The battle lasted 3 hours. When evacuation ships finally arrived, the settlement still stood. The walls were damaged and many buildings were destroyed, but the people were alive. Dayun found Taewon sitting against a wall, too exhausted to move. You saved us, she said. We saved you, Taewon corrected. All of us together. Same thing. She handed him a cup of water. That sword chose better than you think, young man. After the evacuation, Taewon sat in the transport ship with his squad. Kethra was quiet for a long time. Finally, she spoke. You fight like prey, she said. Taewon waited for the insult that would follow. But you're still alive, and so are 15,000 civilians who should be dead. Kethra looked at the sword. Maybe the blade knows what it's doing after all. Thun grunted. Grav grunted back. Sunhee smiled. Taewon closed his eyes and felt the sword's warmth. It showed him an image. Not of the battle they'd won, but of the war ahead. There would be more fights. Harder fights. But for the first time, Taewon thought he might actually survive them. He'd fought his first battle against the Void Swarm. He hadn't fought like a hero. He'd fought like a human, messy, practical, and alive. Maybe that was enough. Taewon sat in a white room and tried not to panic. The sword lay across his lap, still glowing softly. He had tried to put it down 17 times. It always came back to his hand. This is a mistake, he said to the empty room. I'm nobody. I fix air filters and replace power cables. I've never even been in a real fight. The sword pulsed with warm light. It almost felt like the weapon was trying to comfort him. A door opened. Heejin entered carrying 2 cups of something that smelled like burnt plastic. Fleet coffee? She handed him one and sat down across from him. How are you holding up? She asked. I want to go home, Taewon said honestly. Can't. The sword bonded to you. The Archons checked every ancient text they have. The bond is permanent until you die or finish whatever job the sword chose you for. Heejin took a sip of her coffee and made a face. This is terrible. The job is fighting the void swarm, Taewon said. I'll die in about 5 minutes. Maybe not. My grandmother fought in the human expansion wars. She always said our advantage wasn't strength or speed. It was that we're too stubborn to quit. Yejin smiled. Also, we cheat. We use tools and tricks and whatever works. Maybe that's what the sword saw in you. Before Taewon could answer, the door opened again. This time, it wasn't just one person. 6 guards entered first, followed by High Archon Velshara, followed by a dozen officials from various alien species. Last came Commander Relthor, the Saurian officer who commanded the entire flagship. His scales were deep green and his eyes were cold. We need to discuss your situation, Relthor said. His voice sounded like rocks grinding together. I didn't mean to, Taewon started. The Galactic Council has been in session for 6 hours, Velshara interrupted. Her voice was gentler than the commander's. 3 species have formally protested the sword's choice. 4 more have expressed concerns. They believe a human cannot possibly stand against the swarm. I agree with them, Taewon said. Unfortunately, what we believe doesn't matter. The Valkyroth blade has chosen and we must accept its judgment. She looked tired. We will test you. If the sword truly found something worthy in you, the test will reveal it. The tests were brutal. They put Taewon in a combat simulator and made him fight digital versions of swarm creatures. He died 43 times in the first hour. But each time he died, he lasted a little longer. The sword was teaching him. When he held it, his body moved in ways he didn't know were possible. His reflexes got faster. His mind worked quicker. Interesting, said the technician running the simulation. Your technique is terrible, but you learn from every mistake. Most warriors repeat the same errors over and over. They tested his physical abilities. Compared to any alien warrior, Taewon was weak. A Korgath child could probably beat him in an arm wrestling match. But the sword gave him strength beyond his body. When he swung the blade, it cut through solid steel like paper. They tested his intelligence. Taewon scored average on most tests, but he noticed something the alien warriors didn't. When shown a battle scenario, the aliens looked for ways to prove their individual strength. Taewon looked for ways to use the environment and work with others. You think like an engineer, not a warrior, Commander Relthor said after the tests. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. It's what we have, Velshara replied. They assigned Taewon a trainer. His name was Bongsu, a human marine who had served in the fleet for 20 years. He was shorter than Taewon, but looked like he was made of steel cables. Scars covered his arms and face. So you're the chosen one, Bongsu said when they met in the training hall. Lucky you. I don't feel lucky, Taewon admitted. Good. Lucky people get careless. Bongsu picked up a practice weapon. The aliens think humans are weak. They're right about our bodies, but they're wrong about us. You know why? Why? Because we don't know when to quit. Every other species in the galaxy has instincts that tell them when a fight is lost. When to run, when to surrender, when to accept death. We don't have those instincts. Bongsu grinned. It wasn't a nice grin. We're the species that looked at a planet covered in ice and said, let's live here anyway. We're the species that built cities in deserts and jungles, and on top of mountains. We see problems and we solve them, because we're too stupid to know when something is impossible. That doesn't sound like an advantage, Taewon said. It is when you're fighting a war. Bongsu moved fast, swinging his practice weapon at Taewon's head. The sword came up automatically, blocking the strike. Taewon's body moved before his mind could catch up, see? Bongsu said. The sword knows what it's doing. Now let's see if we can teach you the same thing. They trained for 3 weeks. Every day Taewon woke up sore and went to bed exhausted. Bongsu pushed him hard, but he also taught him things the other warriors didn't know. How to use terrain to his advantage. How to set traps. How to run away and live to fight another day. Pride gets warriors killed, Bongsu said. Cowardice gets you killed too. The trick is knowing the difference. At night, Taewon dreamed. The sword showed him visions of its previous wielders. He saw a Korgath warrior who could shatter mountains, a Valanthian priestess who could move faster than light, a Drakthar prince who had wings of pure fire. They were all magnificent. They were all legendary. They were all dead. The sword showed him how each one fell. They fought alone, trusting in their individual power. They stood against impossible odds because they believed they were special. They were heroes, but they were also isolated. No one could fight beside them because they were too powerful, too fast, too far above everyone else. Taewon woke from these dreams confused. Why was the sword showing him failures? What was he supposed to learn? On the last day of the third week, news arrived. The Void Swarm had attacked the Hesperus system. 15 million civilians were trapped there trying to evacuate. The fleet was mobilizing. Commander Relthor summoned Taiwan to the bridge. "This is your first mission," the commander said. "You will join the assault force on Hesperus III. Your job is simple. Protect the civilians until the evacuation ships arrive." "I'm not ready," Taiwan said. "No one is ever ready for the swarm." Relthor's cold eyes studied him. "The council wants to see if the sword made a mistake. This is your chance to prove you belong, or to die trying." "That's harsh," Hyejin said. She had been standing nearby pretending to check a console. "That's reality," Relthor replied. Taiwan looked down at the sword in his hand. The blade glowed steadily, patient and calm. It seemed to trust him even if no one else did. "When do we leave?" he asked. 1 hour. Taiwan went back to his quarters and sent a message home to Earth's factory moon, to his mother and his younger sister Eunji. He didn't tell them about the sword or the swarm or the mission. He just told them he loved them and he was doing fine. He hit send before he could change his mind. 1 hour later, he boarded a combat dropship with 50 other soldiers. Most were aliens. A few were human. None of them spoke to him during the flight. They all stared at the glowing sword on his back. Through the ship's window, Taiwan could see Hesperus III growing larger. Dark shapes moved across the planet's surface like oil spreading on water. The swarm Bongsu sat down next to him. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Taiwan admitted. "Good, fear keeps you alive. Just remember what I taught you. Run away and cheat." "Exactly." Bongsu checked his rifle. "Also try not to die." "I hate training new students." The dropship shook as it entered the atmosphere. Red lights flashed. An alarm blared. 30 seconds to drop. The pilot's voice crackled over the speakers. Taiwan gripped the sword tighter. The blade blazed with golden light. Brighter than ever before, he was about to fight the Void Swarm. He was about to see what horrors waited on the surface. He was about to find out if a mechanic with a magic sword could really be a hero. The dropship's doors opened, and Taiwan fell toward war. The temple on Kael'thros Prime was older than most civilizations. Its golden walls reached toward the sky, covered in writing that no one could read anymore. Today, those walls reflected the light of 1,000 ships that filled the sky above. Warriors from across the galaxy had come for one reason. The Valkyroth blade was choosing its next champion. Taiwan wiped sweat from his forehead and adjusted his tool belt. He stood on a metal platform high above the ceremony floor, fixing a broken light panel. Below him, the greatest warriors in the galaxy waited in neat rows. They wore armor that cost more than Taiwan would earn in 10 lifetimes. They carried weapons that could level cities. They had trained since birth for this moment. Taiwan had trained for 3 months to fix air conditioning units. "Hand me the plasma welder," said Hyejin. She was his supervisor, a woman with gray hair and steady hands. She had been working on starships since before Taiwan was born. He passed her the tool and looked down again. The sword floated in the center of the hall, 10 feet above the floor. It glowed with golden light that made Taiwan's eyes water. The blade was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "This is the 3rd selection ceremony I've seen," Hyejin said without looking up from her work. "They're always the same. Some big warrior grabs the sword, everyone cheers, and then we don't see them again until they die fighting the swarm." "Cheerful thought," Taiwan muttered. A gong sounded. The ceremony began. The first warrior stepped forward. He was a Korgath 9 feet tall with skin like gray stone. Muscles bulged under his armor. He had won 1,000 battles. His people had spent years preparing him for this moment. He reached for the sword with confidence. The blade flashed. A pulse of golden energy threw the warrior backward. He crashed into the wall 30 feet away. The crowd gasped. The second warrior tried. She was Valanthian, tall and graceful with skin that shimmered like oil on water. Her people could read minds and move objects with thought alone. She didn't reach for the sword with her hands. She reached with her mind. The sword blazed brighter and spun in the air. The Valanthian warrior screamed and fell to her knees, clutching her head. One by one, warriors approached the blade. One by one, the sword rejected them. A Drakthar with 4 arms and wings like knives. Rejected. A Saurian commander who had defended 12 worlds. Rejected. Korgath Berserker, who had once torn apart a battle tank with his bare hands. Rejected with enough force to crack the floor where he landed. Hours passed. The rejection became routine. Step forward, reach for the sword, get thrown across the room. The gathered aliens began to mutter among themselves. Taiwan heard worry in their voices even though he couldn't understand most of their languages. Something's wrong, Hyojin said quietly. The sword has never rejected this many. How many is normal? Taiwan asked. Maybe 20, 50 at most. We're past 800 now. Down on the ceremony floor, High Archon Velshara was speaking. She was the oldest being Taiwan had ever seen, her silver scales dull with age. Her voice carried through the hall even though she spoke softly. The swarm approaches our final defensive line. Without a champion, our worlds will fall. The sword must choose. More warriors tried. The number reached 900. Then 950. Taiwan's hands were shaking. He didn't know why. He was just a mechanic, just a human from Earth's factory moon who had joined the fleet to earn enough money to send home to his family. This ceremony had nothing to do with him. At warrior number 1000, the sword blazed so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes. When the light faded, the Valkyroth blade had turned red. Angry red like heated metal. Silence fell over the temple. The sword refuses, someone whispered. The whisper spread through the crowd like fire. Within seconds, the hall erupted in noise. Aliens shouted at each other in dozens of languages. Some pointed fingers. Others drew weapons. Ancient grudges surfaced. We're doomed, Hyojin said. Taiwan barely heard her. He was watching his plasma welder slide across the platform. He grabbed for it but missed. The tool fell over the edge. It seemed to fall in slow motion. Taiwan watched it tumble through the air, spinning, reflecting the light of the angry sword. It hit the ceremony floor with a loud clang that somehow cut through all the shouting. Every eye in the temple turned to look up at the maintenance platform. Taiwan felt his face burn with embarrassment. Sorry, he called down. His voice echoed in the sudden silence. He climbed down the ladder quickly, trying to ignore the thousands of warriors staring at him. His boots hit the floor and he hurried toward where his tool had fallen. It lay near the dais near the floating sword. Taiwan picked up the welder and checked it for damage. Still worked. Good. These tools were expensive. He turned to leave but paused. The sword floated right beside him, close enough to touch. Up close it was even more beautiful. The blade seemed to be made of light itself, held together by golden energy. Patterns moved across its surface like living things. Taiwan had no idea why he said what he said next. Maybe it was the embarrassment. Maybe it was just human awkwardness. Maybe it was fate. Mind if I try? For a moment, nothing happened. Then someone laughed. Another person joined in. Within seconds, the entire temple hall was roaring with laughter. Taiwan felt his face turn even redder. Of course they laughed. Humans were the youngest species in the Galactic Council. They had only been traveling to the stars for 500 years. They had no claws, no natural armor, no psychic powers. They were small and weak and soft. They were good at building things and fixing things, but not at fighting. Everyone knew that. The laughter was still echoing when the sword moved. It fell. Not a rejection, not a violent push. It simply fell gently through the air and settled into Taiwan's hand. The temple went silent again. The blade felt warm in his grip. Light poured from it, gold and white, and colors Taiwan had no names for. The light wrapped around his arm, his shoulder, his whole body. He could feel the sword in his mind like someone was speaking to him without words. Taiwan looked up. Thousands of faces stared back at him. Aliens who could tear apart steel with their hands. Warriors who had fought for centuries. Heroes who had saved entire worlds. They all looked shocked. Oh no, Taiwan said. High Archon Velshara stepped forward. Her ancient eyes were wide. The Valkyroth blade has chosen, she said, her voice shaking. After 1,000 rejections, it has chosen a human. The sword blazed brighter in Taiwan's hand as if agreeing. Somewhere in the crowd, someone started screaming about how this was impossible. Others joined in. Arguments erupted again, louder than before. But Taiwan barely heard any of it. He was too busy staring at the legendary weapon in his hand and wondering how a simple mechanic from Earth's factory moon had just become the galaxy's only hope.